The war between Hamas and Israel continues, no end in sight. This war is also here, though, at home. A war of escalating tensions and a political divide so great it invades the political discussions at the local level and could even help decide the presidential election.
Now, this is Talking Points on CBS News Minnesota.
Good evening and welcome to Talking Points. Tonight we will examine the continued fallout here at home of the Israel-Hamas war. The Minneapolis City Council, like other local governments around the country, weighed in with a resolution demanding a ceasefire over the objections of the local Jewish community and a Jewish mayor who supports a two-state solution. And there is so much more. Tonight we will hear from all sides who, despite their profound differences, share the weight of this war and the dread of what might lie ahead. Let's start with Humphrey School professor and political analyst, Professor Larry Jacobs. Well, joining us right now is Professor Larry Jacobs of the Humphrey School of Public Affairs at the University of Minnesota. Thank you so much for coming on.
Great to be with you.
You are the political expert, the political fallout of this ongoing war in the Middle East here at home, both nationally and locally. Your thoughts?
Joe Biden's approval rating is 40% or lower, and this is going to be another hit on Joe Biden. What we're seeing is across the country in cities, resolutions being passed calling for a ceasefire in Gaza and calling for an end of the U.S. military support for Israel with regards to Gaza. But beyond that,
including right here in Minneapolis.
Exactly. Minneapolis, we saw the city council override Mayor Frey's veto. And so now Minneapolis has joined Atlanta and Detroit and Chicago and San Francisco in passing resolutions calling for a ceasefire. But even beyond that, the political damage to Joe Biden is really cutting very close to home in terms of his efforts to build a coalition that will support him and turn out to vote. And right now, it's bad news.
Right. Muslims here in Minnesota and across the country are organizing an effort to not vote or vote against Biden for a third-party candidate or even for former President Trump. Could this issue could this issue decide the election?
Absolutely. We are seeing, for instance, in Michigan, which is one of the biggest battleground states, that the very large Arab population has told the administration that they're not going to support Joe Biden. They may just sit out the election. The administration is so concerned that it's been sending teams of experts on the Middle East and Israel to visit with the mayor of some of the big cities and meet with community groups. But the reality is that Joe Biden probably needs to change policy. I don't think, talking points is going to get the job done, given the level of backlash that Joe Biden is suffering from Arab Americans, Muslim Americans, and progressives more broadly. It's a very dangerous development for Joe Biden.
Let's talk about, at the end, like any vote is a personal decision by an individual. The personal fallout in terms of the rise of anti-Semitism and the rise of anti-Muslim feelings. What's the impact there, and what is happening across the country?
The FBI director recently came out and said that all the lights are blinking and that the FBI had not seen elevated threat levels with regards to anti-Muslim, anti-Jewish communities at the same time in the past, that this is a really extraordinary moment. And this is adding to the sense of rage, a sense of injustice, and a demand that the administration fix what's going on in the Middle East and particularly in Gaza. The problems facing Joe Biden just keep stacking up.
It's as if this war is very much here at home as well, isn't it?
It sure is. There is a very personal sense of rage that the U.S. is supporting Israel at a time when the casualties, including many, many women and children, are mounting in Gaza. There's talk by the president and his aides that Israel and the prime minister Netanyahu are going to change policy, but so far we haven't seen that, and it's just contributing to a sense of futility, and that there is a intense drive to punish the administration for what is considered to be a grave injustice.
Well, Professor Larry Jacobs, thank you so much for your time and your analysis.
Good to be with you.
Up next, the personal perspective of Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey and the passionate views of Minneapolis Council member Robyn Wonsley, who succeeded in getting a ceasefire resolution passed despite the mayor's veto. Well, joining us now is Mayor Jacob Frey. Mayor Frey, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me, Esme.
I know we were talking just before we taped about the fact that this war has hurt so many people, and the pain and the suffering and the weight of it and the enormity of it stretches into our community. It certainly has impacted you. What has this whole situation been like with this resolution calling for a ceasefire, the veto, the override, all of that?
The whole war is heartbreaking. Every life lost on October 7th and every life lost since, whether they're Palestinian or Israeli, Arab or Jewish. We've got families that have been destroyed, quite a few children that have been killed, and communities feel it in a huge way, whether they live across the world or right here in the Twin Cities. And I certainly, as a Jew, feel it as well.
What's this been like for you?
I was hopeful that the city council would come forward with a unifying resolution. Let me take a step back, Esme. First of all, we're not experts in international relations to begin with, and so I don't think it makes sense for us to come forward to have a formal city position on this issue when each of us could put out our own individual positions and send them on to our respective congresspeople and senators and even the president of the United States. But I'm not an expert in international relations or military strategy, and neither is the council. And so to delve very deeply into this very complex history and this very horrible war it is a tough thing for a city to grapple with. But nonetheless, the issue was put on my desk. And so once it was, I was hopeful that we could come forward with some unifying push. And there was a lot of room to do so. I'm a Jewish mayor, and I strongly support a ceasefire. I strongly support both a sovereign Palestine and a sovereign Israel. In other words, a two-state solution. I'm adamantly opposed to Netanyahu and his whole administration and most everything that he's doing right now. And so with those common principles, there was quite a bit of room to come together and see some unity. Sadly, that's not the route the council took. The resolution they passed was unlike any other resolution in the entire country. It was far more aggressive in that it uplifted one community, the Palestinians, who deserve, by the way, to be uplifted. And it pushed down and all but eliminated the history of Jews and Israelis, many of whom were refugees following the Holocaust.
What is your concern going forward about attitudes of anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, all of these things? What is your concern about it?
My concern is that we're not finding the common humanity where it exists. And in Minneapolis, it exists everywhere. It exists out on Nicollet Mall. It exists in Northeast Minneapolis, and it exists in these extraordinary Somali malls down on the South Side. These are places where I go to find extraordinary loving people, to buy some incredible sambusa, or to get some new clothes. I mean, these are great spots that when I have friends visit from out of town, one of the places I send them to is the Somali Mall, is Carmel, is Mall 24.
The banning, for those who haven't heard, is the owner of the Carmel Mall has said that he is banning you from that mall, which does not seem at all possible. But it seems petty at one level, and then yet it seems a lot more serious than that.
It is more serious than that. We've seen people in our country that have been banned for their ethnicities or for positions that they've taken. It's not the right choice to exclude somebody because of differences, even if they do exist. It's the right decision to say, hey, come on over. Let's have a sambusa, cup of Somali tea. Let's enjoy some hummus together, something that all of our ethnicities over there in that side of the world have in common. And let's work it out. Let's talk and have a conversation. Banning cuts off the conversation altogether. And I don't think that helps anything.
Mayor Frey, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Well, joining us right now is Minneapolis City Council member Robyn Wonsley, who was really one of the champions, if not the champion, of the proposal for a ceasefire, for the City Council to support a ceasefire. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Esme, for having me on.
Why did you bring this to the fore?
I brought this forward because my residents asked me, and I know that while we are separated from the violence in Gaza by thousands of miles, this has had an immediate, deep impact on members of our local community. And just as the world turned to Minneapolis in the wake of George Floyd's murder by MPD, the world has turned to Gaza. And as someone who was in the streets demanding justice for George Floyd, seeing the world, rise to the occasion and support us to receive that justice, I wholeheartedly feel like we have the opportunity and responsibility here to return that same solidarity to the people of Palestine. And my residents have asked me and many of my colleagues to do just exactly that. And this resolution has been just a small token of our commitment for, seeing a genocide come to an end in Gaza.
Well, let me ask you about that, because your critics will say that you didn't give due consideration to what happened on October 7th. You had a slaughter of men, women, and children who were going about their business, their lives, and they were massacred, tortured, raped. What do you say to that?
I say right now, the focus is ending a US-funded genocide in Gaza. And I say genocide because experts in the United Nations forewarned that the siege of Gaza will risk a genocide. That's also explicitly named or by a number of international bodies that have said that certain governments supporting Israel's strategy of warfare would enable a potential genocide. We're seeing right now the Biden administration ignore those clear warnings and have now not but once, but twice bypassed Congress to send Israel hundreds of millions of dollars in weapons to support the siege in Gaza. And it's so important that we do everything that we can, such as passing resolutions as we did here in Minneapolis and joining the national and global movement with other cities like Atlanta, Detroit, and San Francisco to say we have to stop this genocide, especially in light, if anyone could look at the photos from what happened in Rafah during the Super Bowl on Sunday, you cannot easily turn away from those images and not think we need to do something right now. And any elected official who has the power or authority to get their local governments and federal legislators to put an end to this, they need to do what they can. And that's exactly what we're doing here in Minneapolis.
I'm also looking at the political impact of this. Obviously, you are one of the numerous progressives on the Minneapolis City Council. Amongst progressive voters, are there going to be repercussions in the fall for President Biden and on down the ballot because of this issue?
I can imagine there will be impacts, largely again because we have international bodies. You have a majority of American residents, particularly over, I believe, 60% of Americans support a ceasefire. And we right now see the Biden administration ignoring the majority populace that says we should not be sending millions of dollars over to Israel to fund this genocide. We should be, rerouting those funds to support our collective well-being here, right here, home.
Okay. And I know you've mentioned genocide several times. What about the slaughter, though, on October 7th of those innocent Jewish residents?
I think, again, everyone recognizes what is needed right now to end a genocide, the violence that's happening in Gaza. That will not happen without a ceasefire. And that is what the national and global community in Minneapolis and our residents are asking us to advance.
Well, Councilmember Wonsley, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Up next, a prominent local Jewish and Muslim leader weigh in. Well, joining us right now is Steve Hunnings. He is, of course, the executive director of the Jewish Community Relations Council of Minnesota and the Dakotas. Thanks, Steve, so much for coming on.
Thank you, Esme. Good morning, and I appreciate your asking me to participate in your story.
I'm focusing this on the continued war, obviously, is going on between Hamas and Israel, but it seems like there is a war here at home, both in terms of the outward discussion and also for people who are of the Jewish faith and who are Palestinian or Muslim. Tell us, what is going on? You meet with many people. What is going on? What are you seeing in the community?
Let's start with this, because you say Jewish and Palestinian Gaza. You know, we affirm the sanctity of all human life. Anybody with a shred of humanity knows that. And these are terrible days in the conflict. And I want to say that right at the outset. You know, of course, Hamas has been using innocent Palestinians in Gaza for human shields for a long time, and now you're seeing the worst of it. And now, given the intensity of the conflict, that said, we remember everyone who's suffering and dying right now. It's hugely personal. You know, first of all, you think about Minneapolis and a significant Jewish community, many landmarks like Temple Israel, community institutions located in Minneapolis, the community's deep history in Minneapolis, adding to it, you know, seemingly the interconnectedness of the Jewish world. Everybody knows somebody in Israel. Many people know people who are impacted, killed, wounded, fought back, taken hostage, etc. And now you have the city council weighing in on an issue well above its pay grade, you might say. Let the city council deal with the important issues of the city of Minneapolis. This is not healthy. This is anti-Semitism. And I can tell you one thing, Esme, that there's nothing more corrosive of democracy than racism, than anti-Semitism. And to see that where people are going, where they have no compunction about carrying a sign to an event in a public setting before public officials with the most anti-Semitic conspiracy theories you can imagine. I mean, this is what happens when you take what should be hopefully a measured debate and turn it into a cacophony before the city council for political purposes.
And let me ask you about the fallout politically, nationally, because you've got a raging political discussion about what kind of support, if any, should be given to Israel. And the fallout there is pretty extensive. It may even extend into our election and affect the result of our presidential election. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, thank you for that question, because it's a perfect segue, Esme, to something that's real and something for which we're thankful and grateful. That is, just yesterday, the votes of Senator Klobuchar and Senator Smith in favor of the emergency aid to Israel, some $14 billion. It tells you something about the extent of the need, but also humanitarian aid for Palestinians in Gaza. Very important.
Well, Steve, that we're out of time, but thank you so much. There's so many issues here, and obviously the community that you serve, there are many people who are in pain over this, in deep pain.
Indeed, there are. Thank you, Esme. I always appreciate the opportunity to participate in your story, so thanks.
Joining us right now is Jaylani Hussein, who is the Executive Director of CARE Minnesota. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
We were speaking just before we got on about the pain that is very real in the Muslim community, in the Palestinian community here. Please share.
You know, I think for many Minnesotans, every time there's an attack in Gaza and civilians are killed, Palestinian Americans are checking their WhatsApp, they're checking their text messages, they're communicating with their loved ones, they're saying goodbyes, knowing that at any moment one of their relatives can be killed. And We believe now in Minnesota over 100 family members have died in Gaza of relatives here in Minnesota, many of them direct relative, others distant relatives. But this is very home and near to many community members, and we see them every day. They're our neighbors, they're our colleagues, they're, doctors, engineers. There are many aspects of our community in Minnesota. And it's a sad reality that many of them live in that. They're checking in with their family members daily, and they're saying their goodbyes, knowing that there's a chance that they may lose them in an airstrike.
Of course, the personal is also political. That's how people vote. And I know that there is definitely a fallout and reactions here at home, both locally and nationally, to this war and the positions that the United States are taking. I know that you personally have gotten involved with Muslim groups across the country to really speak out against what you see as a terrible policy by the president. Tell us what you've been doing and tell us how that's going.
Yeah, so I outside of my role at CARE, being as executive director, I've been involved in launching the Abandoned Biden campaign here in Minnesota and across the country. And now it has become one of the most significant efforts across the country. And it's really reflecting where American Muslims are. Overwhelming majority voted for President Biden. Many of them now see that that is not a possibility. And it is a pain. It's a double pain because many of us actually voted for him and we expected him to adhere to the same values that he shared with us when he ran as a campaign for president, which was to, respect the dignity and life of human beings, including Palestinian children. And what we've heard from the president, this administration, is a failure of that, and their policies impacting everything. We see today many people who are not Muslims, who are peace lovers in this country, who go to his rallies, who interrupt him every single time, letting him know that we have to talk about a ceasefire and we have to talk about ending this genocide that is happening right now in Gaza. So it is a movement that is.
Let me ask you this: Are these people in your movement that you've helped start? Are they going to be voting for a third party candidate? Are they going to be voting for Donald Trump, or are they simply going to be staying home? Because that is a big deal too.
We see the ballot box as our greatest way to teach the Democratic Party and the Republican Party that the American Muslim community and many of its allies are not only upset, but they're going to use our vote. So we're not staying home. We are going to vote for an independent candidate, more than likely. We haven't made that decision yet. We will do that sometime later this year. But the fact of the matter is the American public also can join us. We don't have to have two-party candidate system in the presidential election. We can actually choose independent. We've seen that in the past as Ross Perot's race. And we can see that here in Minnesota when Governor Ventura won and surprised everybody. So the independent parties can be a president of the United States if the American people are not happy. And we saw that also in Nevada in the Republican primary, that people were voting for not these candidates. And so I think American people cannot necessarily be forced into two options. And we believe we can think about a third option, and we want to do that significantly.
Well, Jailani Hussein, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me today.
And that does it for this edition of Talking Points. As always, reach out to me with comments or concerns via email at esme@wcco.com. The show streams every Wednesday and Thursday night at 6:30 p.m. and 9:30 p.m. On Friday, we post to YouTube for on-demand viewing. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Esme Murphy, WCCO News.